I am Dr. Shanna Katz Kattari. I am currently an assistant professor in the University of Michigan School of Social Work, as well as jointly appointed at the University of Michigan Department of Women, soon to be Women and Gender Studies. We are currently going to a name change. I'm also the director of the Sexuality, Relationship, and Gender Research Collective, srgcollective.com, which is a group of faculty and doc students from a variety of universities across the United States that do work on topics related to sexuality, relationships, and gender, including things around LGBTQIA2S+ issues, kink, non-monogamy, the concept of queer chosen families, sex and disability, STIs, midwifery, all sorts of things. Although it is grounded in the University of Michigan School of Social Work, that is where I am, and that is our home. I use she and her pronouns, or my name as a pronoun is fine. So Dr. Satterley asked me to speak to all y'all, which is really interesting for me because I actually don't have an MSW. I'm that like sneaky person that ended up in social work through kind of some back channels. So I actually went to Widener, where all y'all are, back in the middle of 2000s. And when I applied, I went to Colorado College for my undergrad. I have a bachelor's in sociology with a minor in German. I did a lot of work with women and gender studies, or now they call it feminist and gender studies there. But I knew I wanted to do sexuality things. I had taken my first year, I was supposed to be in an acting class. It was full, so I took human sexual behavior. I was hooked. I became the gal that every time we'd go up from Colorado Springs to Denver, I'd bring all my friends to a sex toy store. I got all my friends their first vibrators. Every time I'd buy a book. So I'd start my own little like lending library collection. And so then I was like, yes, this is what I want to do with my life. And so this was back in the day before there was like, websites that you could apply through. So you actually had to send away for information, then they sent information back to you, and then you had questions, you either had to send an email or a letter or make a phone call, and then back and forth. So I applied to Widener's MED program. At the time they did not have a PhD, they had an MED, and then they had the EDD. And I also applied to Masters of Sex Counseling at San Francisco State University. And while the joint program existed at the time at Widener, I went to a private liberal arts school. I had never really heard of social work. I was like, why would I want to get 2 degrees at the same time? That seems like an awful lot of extra work. Because I was like, I'm going to have to work full time during my program. So trying to do like 2 degrees, I couldn't work full time. I was moving to a new state by myself. I was a baby. I was 20. I was like, this sounds like an awful idea. I don't need a social work degree. And boy, was I wrong. So I went through the Widener program. I was in it for 2 years, and then I decided to do the EDD program, and then I was having some health issues with Philly, and at the time I was also having some issues with how Widener, but also more the field of sexuality as a whole, talked about queer folk, how we talked about folks of color. There was a sexual minorities class, which was one of the few times we talked about bisexuality, pansexuality, queerness, that type of thing. And at the time, really, we talked about race in conjunction with STI testing and STI prevention, HIV prevention. It really wasn't, it wasn't a good racial analysis. And so I really struggled with that. I struggled with sometimes a lot of folks were conflating sex and gender, people were getting misgendered, and I was like, I don't know if this is my home. So I finished up with my master's, and I was like, I'm going off into the big world to do sex stuff. And I did. I worked for a couple of years. I worked for Hot Movies for Her, which is a feminist porn company. I worked for several different sex toy companies, doing everything from training employees, helping design sex toys, creating websites, connecting people, getting people to write reviews, doing educational things, marketing, kind of you name it, the whole wide world of adult sexuality education outside of your kind of Planned Parenthood or sexual and reproductive health clinics. So I did that for a long time, and I really enjoyed it. But it's really hard, especially when you live in Colorado, which is where I moved back to, and then eventually Arizona, and then back to Colorado. There's a lot less opportunities for full-time sex-related stuff than there are, say, on the East Coast or West Coast. So I was trying to figure out what to do. I wound up getting hired doing development and communications work for a Montessori school, so completely outside of my sex wheelhouse. But I had a lot of information and knowledge about development, communications, marketing, all those things from the sex industry, a lot of which things like SEO and social media stuff is really translatable. So I was doing that for a while, and I was like, yeah, like I was having my like secret sex ed workshops and stuff on the side. I wrote a couple of books at the time. Struggled with that process because I really liked what I wrote, but then the pictures were a bunch of like white, slim, cis, non-disabled that I know of women and men in the cunnilingus book. So I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm really frustrated that if I was like, when I did fellatio courses and classes, or if I went to go speak on a college campus, people would be like, yes, we want you to speak about these like very large generic topics. And I was like, yeah, but the communities I care about, the ones that like, I really want to reach, they're the ones that not only do people not book for workshops, but then there are also communities that can't always afford the workshop. So I do a lot of work with disabled and neurodiverse communities, queer and trans, and kind of the alphabet soup of that communities, kink, non-monogamy, polyamory, all of those things. And these weren't the workshops, especially for the folks I wanted to target and to support that could afford, like $700 Tantra weekends. These are the folks that are like, I don't know if I can pay a $20 workshop fee. So I was already thinking about that. I was thinking about a lot of the trainings I was doing for medical providers, for therapists, for counselors, which were like how to not be an asshole to your clients 101, which more people need than you would think. And I was actually at a wedding with one of my partners who had gone through an MSW program. So he had just finished his MSW program. And it was a queer wedding. I'm queer, my partner is trans. Also queer, it was all queer and trans people, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome. And I was sitting at a table with a queer Chicana professor, and we were talking, and she's like, why don't you have your doctorate? And I was like, well, here are my feelings. And I was like, I'm really loud, I'm annoying, I'm gonna like push buttons, I'm gonna like ask you questions. And she's like, great, we need you in social work. And I was like, no, I don't think you understand. I'm not like I have my like things and I'm not gonna shut up about them. And she was like, great, we need you in social work. So that's Dr. Deborah Ortega, who is at the University of Denver. And so I applied for a degree in social work, is the only program I applied to, and I magically got in. And I have spent, so that was 2013 that I started, the vast majority of my career trying to convince people about how crucial the intersection of sexuality and social work is. And I've done it through a variety of things. I have some research on sexuality and disability, and especially on disabled folks who also identify as queer, trans, non-monogamous, polyamorous, kinky, all of those things, has actually been a protective factor for them in negotiating with sexual partners, because as people practice saying things like, here's the names I want you to use for my body parts, or actually like, I'm cool doing that with you, but not with my other partner, or vice versa, or here are my hard limits, this is like what red and yellow mean, here are what my needs are. They're much better at feeling comfortable and asking for their disability related needs to be met, and to like set some hard limits, like, if you're not gonna meet that, I'm not really interested, thank you so much, goodbye. So I have some pieces on that. I've really done a lot of work around trans-affirming healthcare. As somebody who is disabled and chronically ill myself, I spend a lot of time in the healthcare system, and I know that if I, a cis white woman with class privilege and education privilege, is having trouble navigating that, then certainly the same is true for folks with more marginalized or differently marginalized identities. So I've done a lot of work around educating providers about trans-inclusive care, even just basic things like, I don't know, don't misgender your freaking clients, like it's not that hard. But also things like intersectional experiences of discrimination. So we know trans people experience high rates of discrimination in healthcare settings. Trans folks of color experience higher rates than their white counterparts. And actually multiracial trans folks experience it higher than trans folks of color in any individual race group. Disabled trans folks experience higher rates of discrimination in various social and healthcare settings. And again, folks who have multiple types of disabilities and impairment experience higher rates than those who just have one. So I do a lot of that kind of stuff, but I've also been trying to do a lot of work around how do we talk about like actual sex in social work. Social work used to have a sexuality peer-reviewed journal that has since disappeared. Interesting enough, the disability journal has also disappeared. So perhaps maybe I'm the problem, I hope not. But I actually, my first year in my doc program, worked with a lot of sexuality and sexual health social work scholars So some who had come through Widener's program, Dr. Kimberly McKay, who's actually at Temple now, is fantastic. Emily McCabe, Virginia Ramsay Winter, I think that was Connecticut and Kansas perhaps. Melissa Bird, who I think was out of USC, Stephanie Begun, who is also at University of Denver. I think we're all doctors now, so, fancy group of doctors. But we did things like surveying MSW students who are currently in programs about how were they talking about abortion? Were they talking about how to talk to their clients about abortion, regardless of what their own personal viewpoint was, knowing that many people, especially those who are doing community mental health or working in medical settings as medical social workers, are going to have these conversations. We did work about comfort, having talks about sex and sexuality, about belief systems and religion. So we put, I think the group of us individually and groups put out maybe 5 or 6 articles about discussing sexuality in MSW education, and so that was really neat. And we put a symposium or 2 together for different conferences, which I really enjoyed. At the University of Denver, I designed an LGBTQIA social work course. At the University of Michigan, I've designed a sexuality and social work course, as well as a LGBTQIA 2S social work course. Because I think that all of those pieces come together, and I think that social workers, whether you are an MSW or kind of in the field of social work, we are uniquely positioned to handle, engage, support, discuss, collaborate, all those fantastic words, the issues of sexuality and social justice, which is one of obviously the foundational values of social work. And so even when we're talking about something like blowjob workshops, who has access to those, who's teaching those, cost-wise, is it near transit? Who is it being advertised to? Is it inclusive of trans folks? Is it inclusive of disabled folks? Is it inclusive of folks for whom English is not their first language? Are we offering blowjob workshops in Spanish, in Farsi, in Arabic, in Korean? Right? I don't know. Let's have those conversations. Things about porn, right? There's a lot of porn is this negative, horrible thing, but we also know that it actually helps a lot of people navigate relationships, and even relationships with themselves, right? So how do we do some porn literacy and porn education with other social workers as well as with clients, because those things are going to come up. And if I, Dr. Shanna Katz Kattari, have trouble bringing things like this up with my healthcare provider, that sex triggers a migraine, then how do we expect someone who doesn't have that experience to do that? So it's really imperative for us to have those conversations, as well as conversations around sexuality and identity around sexuality, gender, relationship style, all of that. Self-determination, which is a key component of social work, is right there, right? The way that language around trans and gender diverse identity has changed throughout, even the last 2 or 3 years, but especially the last decade or 2, self-determination is yeah, you get to decide how you are going to name yourself, your body, your experience, your identity, your expression, your orientation, your attraction, your behavior. You get to do that. And that is something that I don't see as often with sexuality folks who are not also social workers. So we've got the sexuality folks who are I got the sex ed stuff, but have a lot of room to grow around person and environment, self-determination, supporting people where they're at, helping them connect with resources, addressing issues, and not just being well, you should, have better sex, but okay, so what are the micro, meso, and macro things that are impacting you there? Then we have social workers who are awesome and are we got our micro, meso, macro breakdown, we've got that self-determination, person and environment, social justice, but then they're oh, sex. I drew a vulva on the board in a classroom the other day, and people were oh, you better wipe that down before the next class comes in. And I was wow, we are really still deeply steeped in that sex panic, right? And so something I love about being at the intersection of sexuality and social work is that we're bringing in those social justice, determination, person environment, theoretical approaches, but we also have this applied piece that we're yeah, you should have access not only to abortion, but also to choose how to raise your child in a world that has food and services and stuff that you need. And also you should be having good sex, and good for you. And you should be having good sex when you are in a rehabilitation home, or when you are older and aging, or when you are a veteran from the military, or when you are a 15-year-old who's having trouble communicating with their family. Like, you should be able to have good sex and a healthy sex life, and or not, right? You might be asexual, and we're going to support them in that. So it's the merging of the two together that I'm really excited about. I'm hitting my time, so hopefully it was interesting and educational for y'all. You're always welcome to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter as Dr. Shanna K, so it's like the @ Dr. DrShannak. You can also check out Shanna Katari, ShannaKattari.com for some of my research, or email me at skattari@umich.edu. And I'm so excited to welcome you into the field. I'm hoping at some point we can collaborate on something, and welcome.